They told me I was no longer their mother, right after I signed the house over to them. I had raised them. I fed them. I buried their father with my own hands. And still they decided I had no place in their lives anymore. That night, I left my own home with a single bag and a folder of papers. But what they didn't know was I had one more key left in my pocket, and that key didn't open any door they expected. I had this chair in the corner of my living room. No one ever sat in it but me. I didn't think of it as a throne or anything like that. It was just mine. Quiet. Familiar. Like the last thing in the house that hadn't shifted since Harold died. The house was always still now. Sometimes I would turn the TV on just to hear someone else breathing. But that day, I let the silence stay. There's something about quiet that can be heavy or comforting, depending on your state of mind. That morning, it felt like both. Carlotta knocked just as I poured my second cup of coffee. She never calls ahead. Says it kills the joy of a spontaneous visit. She brought banana bread again. I don't even like banana bread that much, but she makes it as an excuse to sit and talk. I appreciate that. She sat on the edge of the couch and leaned forward like she was about to tell me something she'd been holding in for a while. Lyle's flipping properties again, she said. Had one listed over on Jameson Street. Then she paused, watched my face. And he mentioned your house, just like that. No build-up, no sugarcoating. I blinked. That's strange, I said, because Lyle never talks about my house unless he wants something. And usually that means he already made a decision before asking. Carlotta shifted in her seat. I could feel her watching me carefully, the way she used to when I first lost Harold and barely knew where I put my shoes. He didn't say anything concrete, she said. Just that it's a beautiful spot. $1 million view. You know how that goes. I nodded. I did know how that goes. I knew exactly how that goes. The thing is, I've lived here for over 30 years. I raised both of my children under this roof. I watched the seasons roll across the backyard like slow-moving plays. Every scratch on the doorframe held a memory. Every creak in the floorboard knew our names. But lately, when Lyle visited, he looked at this place like it was square footage and resale value. Kendra did too. She complimented the natural light and then took pictures with her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I hadn't said anything. I wanted to believe they were just being curious. But Carlotta's words felt like confirmation of something I'd tried to ignore. Before she left, Carlotta handed me a small envelope. Just in case, she said. Inside was the number of her old law office and the name of someone she trusted. That's the first day I realized my children might be drawing plans around my life, as if I were a chess piece that needed to be moved. And for the first time in a long while, the silence in the house felt less like peace and more like warning. If you've ever looked around your own home and wondered when it stopped being yours, you're not alone. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. They showed up on a Wednesday, unannounced. Lyle was carrying a cardboard box with papers, and Kendra walked in like the place already belonged to her. She headed straight to the kitchen, opened a cabinet, and said, "This space could be redesigned for better flow." I stood there, holding a dish towel, wondering if I had missed some invisible notice that today would be an inspection. Lyle dropped the box on the dining table and gave me a quick hug. It felt more like a handshake disguised as affection. He started pulling out documents, organized into folders with color-coded tabs. "We've been thinking about the future," he said. "With everything going on in the market, now's a good time to secure things for later." I said nothing, just leaned on the counter and listened. Kendra chimed in, her tone lighter, like this was a casual update, not a shift in ownership. "It's really about protecting you," she said. streamlining things so that if anything ever happens, we don't have to deal with messy paperwork. I still didn't say a word. My fingers curled tighter around the towel. Lyle slid a manila folder toward me. Inside was a legal packet with my name printed on the front and a yellow tab marking the signature page. "We talked to a lawyer," he said. "This document just transfers administrative rights. It doesn't mean we're changing anything right now. It just gives us the ability to act on your behalf. If there's an emergency, if you get sick, we can step in." I looked at the stack of words printed in a language designed to look helpful but feel confusing. I had seen these tactics before. At the library, I used to help elderly patrons interpret their mail, especially when it came from banks or medical offices. I recognized the shape of manipulation even when it came in polite fonts. But this was my son. He kept his voice calm, as if he was reading from a script. "It's all standard," he said. "It protects you and simplifies everything." Kendra was walking around, pointing at the walls like a realtor. "The paint's still good, but a soft grey would modernize it. And maybe open shelving here. It'll make the kitchen feel bigger." I interrupted. "I haven't decided anything." They both paused. Lyle smiled, a little too quickly. "Of course," he said. "No pressure. We just want you to look it over." But I could feel it. The way their bodies moved in the space. The way they looked at each other across the room. This wasn't a suggestion. It was the first step of a plan that had already begun. I said I'd review the papers. They left after an hour. Kendra with a handful of photos she'd taken on her phone. Lyle reminding me he could bring dinner next time. As soon as the door closed, I sat at the table, stared at the folder, and opened to the last page. The signature line was already flagged. The date was left blank. Everything about it looked harmless, clean, practical, sensible. But there was one thing missing from the whole packet. Nowhere did it say what would happen if I changed my mind, because in their version of this story, I wasn't expected to. And that realization sat with me longer than the silence after they left. The next morning, I wrapped the folder in a dish towel and walked 2 blocks to Carlotta's house. She was already out front, watering her tomatoes. She didn't say a word when she saw the papers in my hand, just wiped her hands on her apron and held the screen door open. We sat in her sunroom, a little too warm even for spring, and I laid everything out on the table between us. Carlotta had a calm way of reading legal things. She used to teach contract law before retirement, and kept that habit of underlining with her finger while she read silently. She went through every page, slowly, lips pressed together, brow creased the way it used to be when her husband forgot to pay the electric bill. When she got to the signature page, she flipped it over and tapped lightly on the back. "Nothing illegal," she said. "But this isn't administrative access. This gives them the right to lease, sell, or remortgage the house without your consent. And once it's signed and filed, reversing it would cost you more than you probably want to spend." I already knew it wasn't right, but hearing it said plainly made the air feel thinner. Carlotta leaned back, crossed her arms. "I wouldn't sign this, not without conditions. You want to protect yourself. You need a delay clause. Something that gives you time to undo it if things go sideways." I stared at her. She got up, walked to her desk, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was blank except for a heading and a paragraph in small print. "This is a rider I used once with my cousin," she said. "It says the transfer doesn't become effective until 45 days after signing. That gives you space. If something feels off, you can revoke it before they move too fast." I took the paper from her and read it twice. It felt like a life raft. Not a solution, but something to hold on to. "You'll need someone to notarize it," she said. "And you'll need to attach it directly to the packet. not just staple it in. Otherwise, they'll claim it wasn't part of the agreement. I nodded. Carlotta walked me to the door. She rested her hand on my shoulder. "They're your kids," she said. "But this is your life. Don't sign anything just because you're afraid to be difficult." I walked home slowly. I passed my old library branch, the one that got turned into a frozen yogurt shop. My reflection in the glass surprised me. I looked tired, but not small. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with both packets in front of me. I attached the clause with a binder clip, the way Carlotta said. I didn't sign yet. Just folded the whole thing back up and slid it into the drawer under the phone. Then I wrote a note to myself on a sticky pad. Red ink. One word. Watch, not fight, not fear. Just watch. Because sometimes the best way to learn what someone intends is to give them room to show you. And I had a feeling that once I stepped aside, they would stop pretending. And when they did, I wanted to be ready. 3 days later, Lyle called to say he and Kendra would be stopping by with dinner. He didn't ask, just informed. I had the paperwork ready, the added clause clipped in neatly behind the signature page. I wasn't planning to hand it over yet. I just wanted to see if they would notice the change. They arrived just after 6. Kendra brought takeout from a new place downtown. Too much food for 3 people, too many bags, like a housewarming meal for a home that wasn't hers yet. She unpacked dishes like she belonged in my kitchen. Lyle opened a bottle of wine and poured a glass without asking if I wanted any. We sat at the table, the same table where I had fed them as children, where we'd once carved pumpkins and wrapped birthday presents. Now it was covered in paper cartons and conversation that felt too cheerful. They didn't bring up the documents until after dinner. Lyle leaned back in his chair, wiped his mouth, and said it softly like it was nothing. "So, have you had a chance to look it over?" I said I had. He nodded, trying to act casual. "Any questions?" I stood, walked to the side table, and brought the folder over. I placed it in front of him, face down. He reached for it. "Before you open that," I said, I added something. Kendra tilted her head, still smiling. "Oh, just a clause," I said. "A delay clause. It gives me 45 days after signing to revoke, if I feel pressured or unsure." Lyle's face shifted. Not dramatically, just enough for me to see the pause behind his smile. "I thought you trusted us," he said. "I do, but trust and protection aren't always the same thing." Kendra didn't speak. She just picked up her wine and looked away. He flipped through the pages. When he got to the clause, he read it twice, jaw tightening a little more each time. "This isn't standard," he said. "Our lawyer didn't include this." "No," I said. "It came from a different lawyer, a friend of mine." Lyle looked at me like he was trying to recalculate something. His voice stayed even, but the warmth had drained out of it. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." I said nothing. He placed the folder down and pushed it back toward me. "Let us take this and have someone review it. Make sure it won't cause issues down the line." "Of course," I said. Kendra finally spoke again, quieter now. "We're just trying to help." "I know," I said. "And I'm just trying to be sure." They left not long after that. Lyle took the folder with him. No hugs this time. Just a half-hearted wave and the sound of the screen door snapping shut behind them. I stood by the window and watched them pull out of the driveway. They sat in the car for a moment before driving off. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel the air had changed. Something had shifted. The script was no longer playing the way they expected. And now, they would have to rewrite their next move. Inside, I rinsed the dishes one by one, slowly, as if scrubbing away something that hadn't quite settled right. Then I went to the hallway cabinet, pulled out my old fireproof lockbox, and opened it. I checked that the second copy of the paperwork, the one with the same clause clipped in, was still there, still untouched, still mine. That night, I didn't sleep much, not from fear, but because I could hear it now, the click of plans being made without me, and the way silence, once so comforting, had started to feel like warning. The following week moved slowly. Lyle didn't call. Kendra didn't drop by. It was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like space. It felt like distance. Strategized. Intentional. On Friday, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, just my name, in Kendra's handwriting. Inside was a note and a revised copy of the document. The delay clause was gone. Instead, they had included a new clause that limited my ability to alter any conditions once signed. Neat, tidy, permanent. The message was clear. Carlotta came by that afternoon with an armful of basil from her garden. I told her about the envelope. She didn't say anything for a long while, just sat at the table and ran her fingers along the edge of the countertop. "They want it locked," she said finally. "Not shared, not discussed. Controlled." I nodded. My hand rested on the envelope. It felt heavier than it should. "They're moving faster now," I said, "like they're afraid I might change my mind." Carlotta glanced at me. "Or they know you already have." That evening I went for a walk, same route as always, past the park, the old bakery that never reopened after the flood, the elementary school with the faded mural on the wall. The sky was soft with early spring light, and the sidewalks smelled like warm concrete and grass. At the far end of the block, I saw a realtor's sign. Not mine, someone else's home. But it triggered something sharp. I imagined my porch with a white sign in front, a photo of the living room staged and bright, with none of my things in it. And I felt a tightening in my chest that wasn't fear. It was clarity. When I got home, I opened the drawer and pulled out the copy I had kept, the one with Carlotta's clause still attached. I placed it next to the new version they had returned. The contrast was like two stories about the same woman, written by people who saw her completely differently. Later that night, I received a message from Lyle. Just a sentence. "Let us know when you're ready to sign the final version. No warmth, no pretense, just a countdown." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop. I searched for a name Carlotta had mentioned once before, a woman she knew from her law days who handled property rights and elder fraud cases. Her office was still listed, and I sent an email. 2 days later, she called. Her voice was measured but direct. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, she asked if I had proof. I said I had copies with timestamps. She said that was a good start. She also suggested pulling my property title to confirm nothing had been filed without my knowledge. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because something inside me had shifted. For so long, I had been trying not to make waves, trying not to cause tension. But there comes a point when protecting peace means protecting yourself. The next morning, I printed every document, scanned each page, and placed them in a sealed folder. I labeled it quietly in black ink, just one word: safeguard. Then I placed it in the fireproof box. Not as an act of defiance, but as a reminder. They could take many things from me, but not without my awareness, not without resistance. It was a Thursday when the knock came, not a light tap like Carlotta's, not even the impatient rhythm of delivery drivers. This was steady, firm, measured. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. Lyle stood there with a woman I didn't recognize. She was holding a leather portfolio and wearing a beige suit so stiff it might as well have been armor. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Lyle introduced her as a family advisor, said she was there to help facilitate final steps and ease any confusion. Her name was Beth. I invited them in, but didn't offer coffee. Beth opened her folder as soon as we sat down. She had printed copies of the revised agreement, the same one without the delay clause. She called it clean and efficient, said they had already spoken to a notary who could come by next week. I didn't reach for the papers. I asked if they had reviewed the previous version, the one with the clause Carlotta had added. Lyle said they had, and that it was unnecessary. Not standard, not helpful. Beth agreed. She said my hesitation was understandable, but too much delay could lead to unnecessary complications. She used phrases like proactive planning and generational transition, all smooth, all practiced. I let them talk. I listened to every word. And then I walked to the side cabinet and pulled out the folder I had labeled Safeguard. I placed it on the table and slowly opened it. Inside were 2 copies. The original version I had clipped the clause into, and the revised one they'd brought back without it. I placed them side by side. Beth leaned forward. Her expression stayed neutral, but her fingers tapped the table, just once. I looked at Lyle. His eyes didn't meet mine. I asked them to explain the difference. I knew it already, but I wanted to hear how they would frame it. Beth kept her voice calm. She said the original version complicated things, that any additional clauses could weaken its enforceability. I nodded. Then I asked about the new clause they had added, the one that said once signed, no part could be modified. I asked who added that, and why. This time, Lyle answered. He said it was to ensure no one could interfere later, that it protected the process. I asked if that protection extended to me, or just to them. Silence stretched across the table. I reached into the folder and pulled out one last sheet, a notarized affidavit, signed the day before, confirming that I had retained independent legal counsel and had documented concerns about undue influence. Beth's expression shifted. Lyle stared at the paper like it was written in another language. I stood up and walked to the door. I said I needed time to think. Beth gathered her things, her voice still polite, but no longer smooth. Lyle didn't say much. He just followed her out, shoulders tight. When the door closed, I locked it, not out of fear, but as a line, a clear one. They had brought pressure, I had brought boundaries, and something in that quiet made me feel steadier than I had in months. 2 days later, Kendra showed up alone. No call, no message, just her standing at the porch with a pie in hand, the kind from the store with a perfect crust and no smell. She smiled like nothing had happened. I opened the door halfway. She held out the pie and said she was just dropping by, thought we could talk. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in like she always had, not like a guest, but like someone rearranging what didn't belong to her. She placed the pie on the kitchen counter and sat down at the table like it was still hers. I didn't sit. She started soft, said Lyle was stressed, that the process had dragged out too long, that they just wanted clarity. I listened, arms crossed, leaning on the counter. Then she shifted. She mentioned how hard things had been lately, how Lyle's work had slowed, how the market wasn't what it used to be, that the house could be a security for the future, for their kids, their dreams. I asked if she remembered I still lived here. She said of course, but her eyes didn't stay on mine. They wandered around the room, landing on corners, on my furniture, on the window frames she once called outdated. Then her voice dropped lower. She said she understood I was scared, that maybe I felt like I was losing control, but sometimes letting go was a form of love. I didn't move. She smiled again, thinner this time, and said that Lyle had already talked to a realtor, just to ask questions, just to explore options. Nothing was official, but the interest was there. Strong interest. In this market, she said, it would be a shame not to consider it. I asked her if she was threatening me. She laughed, quiet and short, said I was reading too much into it, that she came with kindness. Then she stood up and adjusted her jacket, said she hoped I would think about the big picture, about what's best for everyone. As she walked toward the door, she turned back and said, Lyle would be by next week, with final paperwork. This time, she said, we're hoping you'll be ready. She left the pie. After she was gone, I didn't touch it. I didn't even unwrap it. Just placed it back in the plastic bag and dropped it in the outside bin. The air around it felt wrong. That night, I went through the emails I had saved, every message from Lyle, every document he sent. I catalogued them by date. I printed the versions of each file, labeled them, filed them. I wanted a clean record of how the language had changed, what was added, what was removed, how they moved from concern to control. Then I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to them, to my lawyer. I outlined the events, I named the pressures, I detailed the tone. I attached the copies and described the visit with Beth. Then I signed it, sealed it, and marked it confidential. In the morning, I mailed it from the post office across town. When I got back, I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window. Outside, the sun was rising slow behind the trees, and the street looked calm. But something had shifted again. Not in them. In me. It was early Monday when Carlotta called. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even say good morning. She just said, "Come over now. I've got something." I didn't question her. I threw on a sweater, grabbed my keys, and walked the few blocks to her house. When I got there, she had the newspaper spread across the kitchen table. But it wasn't the front page she was reading. It was the real estate section. There. She tapped her finger on a listing. 3-bedroom craftsman. Updated kitchen. Mature garden. The photo was mine. The headline said, "Available now." The name of the agent? Someone I'd never met. Carlotta looked at me, her voice low and flat. "They've listed your house." I sat down slowly. I couldn't feel my hands. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't agreed to anything. Carlotta pushed a copy of the listing toward me. I scanned it, my address, my porch, my garden, but described like it already belonged to someone else. She said, "You need to check the county records. Now." So we did. She pulled out her laptop, searched the online registry, and there it was. A pending transfer, filed under my name, marked by someone with limited power of attorney. It had been submitted the same day Beth left my house. My stomach turned. I hadn't granted power of attorney, not even temporarily. Carlotta leaned back, her mouth tight. "This is fraud," she said, plain and simple. I couldn't speak. She clicked through tabs, took screenshots, saved the records. Then she picked up her phone and called the woman from her old law office, the one I had spoken to before. She answered on the second ring. They spoke quickly, quietly. Then Carlotta handed the phone to me. The woman asked if I still had the documents. I said yes. She told me to bring everything, immediately. And she said one more thing. Do not contact your son. I gathered my copies, placed them into a new folder, and walked back home. I didn't cry, not yet. But the grief was different now. It wasn't the grief of betrayal. It was the grief of knowing the damage had already begun. While I was trying to protect peace, they were rewriting ownership. That afternoon, I sat in the lawyer's office across town. Her assistant took my folder. I watched her read through every page with the precision of someone who had seen this before. She asked how Lyle might have gotten access to any prior forms. I told her I had shared a few documents with him weeks ago, when we were still talking. She nodded slowly. "It's enough," she said. "Enough for them to forge the rest." She asked if I had any recordings. I said no. But I had emails, notes, the timeline, witnesses. She smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was solid. "We'll file an injunction," she said. "It will freeze the transfer. Then we start an investigation. This won't disappear quietly." I nodded, still numb, but anchored. She handed me a printed summary. It had all the steps, all the next moves. I folded it neatly and slipped it into my coat pocket. On the way home, I passed a for sale sign on someone else's lawn. I used to see those signs and think of fresh starts. Now, all I saw was erasure. But not mine. Not without a fight. It rained the morning I met with the mediator. Light rain, soft but steady, the kind that soaks you slow. I sat in a small conference room across from Lyle and Kendra, with the mediator between us. She had a folder in front of her, and her voice was calm, practiced, the way someone speaks when they're trying to keep a fire from spreading. Lyle didn't look at me. His hands were folded tightly on the table. Kendra offered a small nod, like she was already ahead of the outcome. The mediator began by reviewing the situation. She mentioned the injunction, the pending investigation, and the notice of fraudulent filing. She said the court was reviewing the signatures and timestamps, and that I had submitted proof of altered documentation. She looked at me and asked if I had anything to add. I said only that I had not signed over my house, and that any claim otherwise was untrue. Then it was their turn. Kendra cleared her throat and spoke first. She said things had gotten out of hand, that they only wanted to secure the family's future, that the listing was a misunderstanding. Lyle stayed silent, until the mediator turned to him and asked for clarity. He said the paperwork had come from me, that I had shared it willingly, that maybe I forgot signing. That was the moment. I reached into my bag and placed a small audio recorder on the table. I clicked it on and let it play. The room went still as my voice came through, calm and clear, from a conversation with Beth. I had recorded it the night she came with Lyle, not because I planned to use it, but because something in me said, "This matters." I had asked her to repeat what changes were made. She had listed them. She had confirmed they removed the clause. She had stated it was final and binding. Then I let the silence stretch. The mediator clicked off the recorder. She leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. She looked at Lyle, then at Kendra. Her voice was still measured, but firmer. "This isn't a misunderstanding," she said. "This is coercion, and possibly fraud." Lyle's jaw tensed. Kendra's lips parted, like she might speak, but nothing came out. The mediator turned to me. "Do you wish to continue with mediation, or pursue legal resolution?" I said I wanted my home protected, my rights restored, and I wanted no further contact initiated by them unless through counsel. The mediator nodded. Meeting adjourned. They left first. Lyle paused at the door like he might say something, but he didn't. I sat there a moment longer. The room was quiet now, except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. I had feared this moment, feared the confrontation. But now that it had come, I didn't feel shattered. I felt rooted. Later that night, I walked through my home slowly, room by room. I touched the doorknobs, ran my fingers along the old wood trim, sat on the edge of my bed and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. This house wasn't just shelter. It was story. It was memory. It was mine. And I was finally done giving away parts of myself to keep the peace. There are thresholds in every life, quiet ones. Not the moments that explode, but the ones that solidify. This was mine. 1 week after the mediation, the envelope came. It was delivered by courier, no return address. Just my name, neatly printed, in a hand I recognized. Lyle's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the dining table, next to my tea, and sat with it for a while. When I finally slid it open, I found a letter inside. 2 pages. The first was typed, formal, carefully worded. It said they respected my decision, that they would cease all communication going forward, that any future matters would be handled through their attorney. They wished me peace. The second page was handwritten. Lyle's voice, stiff and distant. He said he hadn't realized how deeply I felt about the house, that maybe he and Kendra had pushed too hard, that it was never meant to hurt me, just to secure a future that made sense. He didn't apologize, not once. Just phrases like maybe, and I thought. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. I felt space. Like the fog that had hung around my shoulders was finally thinning. That evening, I called my lawyer. I told her what had come, and she advised me to document it, scan it, and file it. I did just that. Then I sat down and made a list. Not of grievances, but of things I had let slide. Things I had allowed for the sake of being agreeable. The favors, the compromises, the silences. By the end of that list, I didn't feel bitter. I felt clean. I called Carlotta the next morning and asked if she wanted to go with me to a notary office. I had papers to file. She showed up in a linen blouse and a sun hat, like we were headed to a garden party. We laughed all the way there. But when we sat in that office, signing and sealing, there was a stillness between us, a kind of reverence. The papers were for a deed trust. I had decided to place the house in a protective trust with clear terms. It would not be sold, it would not be transferred. And when I passed, it would go to a community housing organization that restored old homes for women over 60 displaced by family loss or financial abuse. Carlotta looked at me as I signed the final page. "You sure?" I nodded. It felt right. Afterward, we stopped at a small cafe on the corner, sat by the window. I ordered a scone and a cup of coffee. The sun came through the glass, warm on my face. Carlotta asked me what I planned to do now. I said, live. Not just exist, not just manage, live. I wanted to repaint the kitchen, start a memoir, plant mint in the backyard, maybe take a bus trip to the coast this fall. I hadn't thought about that in years. Back home, I took down the framed photo in the hallway, the one of Lyle and Kendra smiling on the front porch. I replaced it with a watercolor my friend Sylvia had painted years ago. A quiet house by a lake, peaceful, still. There are things you keep because they're part of your life, and there are things you let go because they no longer honor it. I was learning the difference, and with every quiet choice I made, the house felt more like home again. Not because it was protected by legal forms or documents, but because I had chosen to stay, on my terms. The first holiday season without them felt strange, no calls, No invitations, not even a polite text. The silence was thick, but not sharp. It didn't pierce, it settled, like a quiet snowfall on the edges of my life. I decorated the mantel by myself, pulled down the old boxes from the attic. I chose only the things that made me smile. No traditions done out of habit. No ornaments bought for someone else's taste. Just the little pine cone angel my mother made and the ceramic village I'd almost given away last year. On Christmas Eve, I made a roast and set one place at the table. Mine. I lit a candle. I poured a glass of wine. The radio played low, and I ate slowly without rush. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. Later that night, I sat by the fireplace with a notebook in my lap. I had been writing a little each week since the legal mess had started, not just to document, but to understand, to listen to my own voice again. That night, I wrote about forgiveness, not for them, not yet. Maybe never, but for myself. For all the ways I had gone quiet when I should have spoken, for all the nods I had given to keep things smooth, for the years spent walking on eggshells in my own home. A knock came around 9. I paused, startled. It wasn't Carlotta. She would have called. I opened the door slowly. It was Lyle. Alone. No folder, no suit. Just him, in a coat too light for the cold. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe just tired. He said he wasn't here to argue, that he had read the copy of the trust I'd filed, that he understood now it was final, that he knew he had pushed too hard. I said nothing. He looked past me, saw the candle still burning, the plate cleared. His face shifted, but he didn't ask to come in. He didn't ask anything at all. He just said he missed things. Then he turned to go. I let him walk to the end of the path before I closed the door. Not because I was cruel, because I was clear. In the days that followed, something loosened in me. I stopped rehearsing what I would say if he came back. I stopped replaying what had been lost. I walked more, read more, called Sylvia from the old neighborhood and laughed harder than I had in years. And when January came, I took down the decorations without sadness. I packed them carefully, labeled the boxes, tied the lids, not because I was trying to preserve the past, but because I knew I would use them again, on my own terms, in a house that finally felt like mine. From the locks on the doors to the stillness in the kitchen, what they tried to take had been returned, but more importantly, what I had forgotten how to protect, my sense of self, had returned too. And I was no longer afraid of losing it again. Spring arrived quietly that year. The garden bloomed without announcement. Daffodils lined the stone path I had cleared by hand, and the lilac bush near the back fence came back stronger than ever. Life, it seemed, had a way of returning when left in peace. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I brewed coffee slowly, opened the windows, let the house breathe again. Beth came by one afternoon with lemon cookies and a file folder. She had left the firm after everything and was starting something smaller, more personal. She asked if I wanted to consult, maybe help other older women navigate similar situations. I said I'd think about it. Later that evening, I stood in the living room, looking out over the lawn. I remembered the first time I stepped into this house, so many years ago. It had been empty then too, but not hollow, just waiting, the same way I had been, without knowing. I thought about the version of myself that let too much go, that traded her voice for a fragile sense of belonging. I didn't hate her. I thanked her. She got me here. But she wouldn't be coming back. There were still photos of Lyle in my drawer, and once in a while, I'd catch myself wondering where we began to fracture. but I didn't dwell. Pain isn't meant to be a home, it's meant to be a teacher. Now this house is quiet, but it hums with peace, and I've learned how to belong to myself again. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's placeholder, just as me. And maybe, just maybe, that's the best kind of family I could have asked for. If this story reminded you of anything in your own life, take a moment to breathe. You're not alone. So many of us have been made to feel small, to give and give until nothing's left. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply choose yourself. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, or just take a quiet moment for yourself. You deserve peace, too. Thank you for listening,